Okay, so this morning I would like to begin, and I want to talk about loving kindness practice. We're here in the Becoming Nobody Be Loved retreat with Ram Dass in the center of our hearts, in the center of the retreat. And, we come here to bask in the love of each other and in the love of Ram Dass, love we have for him and the love we receive from him. And so this is a place where we discover some new dimensions of love in our hearts. And one of the things that always surprised me, I think things have changed now. I haven't been practicing psychotherapy for about 15 years, but the field has changed. But when I was being trained, nobody taught us that we could deliberately cultivate these qualities of the heart, like love and joy and compassion and equanimity and gratitude. And in fact, there was a prejudice, like if you were trying to cultivate these positive mind states, you might be seen as just being in denial or trying to paste a smiley face on all the difficult experiences of life. And yet we have learned through the chanting practice, and those of you who've done different kinds of Buddhist practice, and I'm sure meditations that I don't even know about from the Hindu tradition, we've learned that by deliberately bringing our hearts, inclining our hearts in a certain direction, that's where they go. When I was learning years ago to ride a motorcycle, and I did not graduate successfully from my course, I was given a motorcycle for my birthday and wound up having to give it back. But anyway, that was because I almost killed the instructor. And I accelerated instead of braking when they were standing in front of me, and luckily they were used to people like me and jumped out of the way. But it was so scary, actually, that I thought, no, I think not in this lifetime. But I learned about something called target fixation, which has helped me and my life and my meditation practice, which is when you're riding the motorcycle, you learn not to look at the things you don't want to hit. So in other words, if you're coming up to a curve and there's a telephone pole, the negativity bias of the brain, our survival wiring, would teach us to look at the telephone pole. But your bike goes where you look. And people have a lot of crashes, actually, for that reason. So you have to learn to look where you want to go. And actually, that's where you will go. So this sounds, I know, very simplistic, but we have such unruly minds and hearts. At least I do, and I bet some of you do too. They're so unruly that to learn how to trust that to that which we incline our love and attention, that's where our hearts will go. In this retreat, we incline a lot of love and attention toward Ram Dass, and he returns it to us. And it's like, why do we love him so much? Yes, he's an icon, and are you here, Ram Dass? I'm talking about you, so I don't know if it's good or bad that you're not here, but we also love him because he loves all of us, and he genuinely listens to each one of us with the same listening quality, and he radiates love. It's really an equal opportunity love radiator. He radiates that love for everybody, and we all feel it. And this is what the practice of metta, or loving kindness, is about. It's about learning to love all of who we are, learning to love everybody. And loving everybody doesn't mean loving the person who abused you the most in this lifetime. You're not going to love that person. But you can free your heart from states of ill will and resentment, from being caught up in revenge fantasies and bitterness. We can free our hearts, even toward the people who really we may not be able to love in this life. So I would like to do some loving kindness practice together this morning. We call it metta, which is a Pali word with sort of the street Sanskrit. In Sanskrit, it's Maitri. This quality of love that we call, it's sort of an awkward translation, loving kindness, but it is meant to convey the love that isn't just exclusive, focused, romantic love or love for our families and friends, but a love that can really transcend all the categories of otherness that we put people into. And the love that includes the non-human world as well. There's a scientist named Suzanne Simard, and I think she's in British Columbia. And she's a professor of forestry at the University of British Columbia. And she has done scientific research that shows that plants and trees communicate with each other. The little myceliae, the kind of fungus that grows in the soil around the roots of the trees, and they behave in ways that foster and engender forest health. They behave in what we would call pro-social or altruistic ways to help each other out. Like if one tree is sick, other trees will send it some sugar. Tree sugar, the good kind, to revive it. And she also discovered that trees know their own children versus the children of other trees. They know their own offspring. And they will help the offspring of other trees, but they'll take care of their children first, their own. And this wakes us up to the possibility that nature's most gentle creatures, right, trees and forests, and that they are actually sentient beings that function at the community level with each other. And of course, indigenous cultures have long recognized this wisdom of the forests, but we are late-comers in modern society. We seem to need scientific research to validate things that we intuitively know or that mystics have known for thousands of years. But I love this understanding that the forests, that the plants, that the creatures are sentient in ways that we may not even begin to fathom. My friend John Lockley, who is here, is an African shaman, and he takes people to the Kalahari Desert in Botswana to do retreat, to learn how to actually do interspecies communication, to communicate with the animals and listen to what they are communicating. And of course, if plants can communicate with each other to promote stability of the greater community, I think we can respect and learn from the forest and the creatures. And metta includes all of this. So I also want to talk about this in the context, and practice together in the context of what I touched on briefly the other morning. We call it DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion work, which we need to do. And I was talking to Lakshman and Duncan this morning and saying, when I bring these things up, I don't want to be a downer to the retreat. We're all here loving each other and chanting and the music and ramdas and in great company and practicing together and the ocean. It's heaven realm. What is it? Opening our hearts in paradise. We're here in paradise. And yet, how do we get to be here? We're very privileged to be here. It's expensive to be here. We don't have to pay to come to the retreat. So I don't even know how much it costs, but I know it costs a lot. So, just to even be here is such a privilege. And then when we look around and we see how white we are, a lot of the spaces that we move in are predominantly white spaces. And there are reasons for this, having to do with redlining and segregation and familiar manifestations of racism. But there also may be things that we do or don't do that encourage it to be like this. Things that are outside of our awareness that we would never do on purpose. But maybe when somebody comes up, even forget about, white people or people of color, but maybe just you're in your friendship group on the beach and somebody comes up that you don't know, and what's your response? Is it to, oh, hi, what's your name? Or is it, well, I was in the middle of a conversation, so I'm not even going to kind of look in their direction. Or something in between. But there are things that we may be doing and not doing that could help to change this. And one of the reasons that it's difficult to talk about is that when we use words like white supremacy or racism, the last thing in the world that any of us in this room want to be is racist white supremacists. We would not call ourselves that. We would not feel that that fits who we know ourselves to be. And yet, through the unconsciousness or the unawareness of our privilege, either as white people or as men, very privileged in this environment. Well, it's true. We look at who's speaking and how much time they have, and we're all aware of all of these things. And because we're here to grow our capacity for love, we're growing our capacity for tolerance and acceptance. But let it not be a spiritual bypass. Let's not pretend that things we notice aren't happening. Let's allow ourselves to notice them and be aware of them and learn from them together. Instead of judging, to be aware, to see what's happening with the intention to understand rather than to judge, and to learn about ourselves. And somebody was saying to me, they were talking about a friend of theirs, a person of color, a man of color, who basically got impatient with them and said, well, you know what, this is on you. And they felt quite wounded by that. This was a good friend. But it is on us, because we don't want to be like Dahlia's accuser and have fixed mindsets. We want to have open, flexible, more fluid and flowing and gracious and spacious and loving mindsets. So to notice what's happening, to be aware of where it lands in us, and to just do it in the spirit of learning together. This is a manifestation of metta, of loving kindness, the willingness to look at all the aspects of who we are. I think it was Mirabai was talking about loving ourselves so that we could love others. And I think, I know I've loved people a lot more than myself, a lot of my life. But it was about receiving love. It's hard to receive love when I'm embarrassed about pieces of who I am, or ashamed of pieces of who I am, because I don't want those pieces to be known. And so when somebody's loving you and you don't want part of yourself, you don't want them to know who you really are, I think it's very difficult to receive that love. I have had, in my experience, at least one spiritual teacher who had the gift of being able to intuit a lot of what I would be thinking. And I was telling Jack the story of how once I had this new boyfriend, and he called me up from across the country and said something like, and now your new lover, da-da-da-da. And it's just like the most horrible paranoid feeling swept through my whole being. Like, I didn't want to be known without my permission. I wanted to only show the pieces that I thought were spiritual and that he would love, and not some of the less skillful aspects of myself. I quoted the Indian teacher, Nisargadatta, and I want to come back to that because I think this too is the heart of metta or loving kindness practice. He said, I find that somehow, by shifting the focus of attention, I become the very thing I look at and experience the kind of consciousness it has. I become the inner witness of the thing. I call this capacity of entering other focal points of consciousness love. And then goes on to say, love says, I'm everything. Wisdom says, I'm nothing. And between these two, my life flows. So this willingness to shift the focus of our attention and step back and receive what's happening, whatever it is, like thing falling down. This willingness to step back and receive the moment and receive each other in our being, and to shift the focus of attention to receive fully whoever or whatever is in front of us. This is an act of love. And when we shift the focus of our attention to do this, it cultivates compassion, empathy, compassion. If I really feel what it's like to be you, those of you who have shared your experience so that I have some sense, Jeff who talked about his dying, or Margaret who shared with me her amazement that she's still here, or just when I really allow myself, when you really allow yourself to receive and take in and become the inner witness, experiencing the consciousness that is in front of us. This capacity to do this it's really miraculous that we can do this and that we can practice this. It's a superpower that we have, that we can direct our attention to our belly, we can direct our attention to our heart, we can direct our attention to each other, and not with a fixed mindset, but with an open willingness to receive. And even if it's unpleasant, then this is what we receive. This is the mind moment. This is the content of this moment. And this is when impermanence is very good news, because if it's unpleasant, we know it'll change. It's not so good news when it's pleasant, because that will change too. Yeah. So this, so let's do some practice together, actually. Jack, how much time do I have left?
Oh.
We have.
You have at least 20, 25 minutes. Anytime.
Oh, great, great. I have no sense
You
of
started
time.
late. You're still.
I live in a timeless realm, which is very nice when you're meditating, but not as nice when you're doing other things in the world. Or just not as convenient, that's what I would say. Good, so we have more time. We're going to do the metta practice, and before we do it, I want to do a practice that I call the jelly roll. And that practice is a way that we surround ourselves with love and cultivate love that we can then direct in any direction. We will begin with ourselves. We'll begin with ourselves. So find a really comfortable posture. When you're doing metta practice, you have to be really comfortable. If it's comfortable to have your back straight, have your back straight. If it's comfortable to slouch, slouch. Because this is a practice where we use our creativity, our imagination, we invoke images and feelings that will strengthen our capacity to love. And it's very hard to strengthen your capacity to love when you're uncomfortable or in pain. So please be comfortable. And you can think of it as a kind of Dharma play, that we're playing with our superpower of being able to incline our hearts in different directions. And we do know, neuroscience has confirmed what we intuitively know, that when we repeat, when we incline our hearts repeatedly in a certain direction, and you've been hearing this all week, that direction gets strengthened, and that quality of the heart gets strengthened. We're always practicing something every moment. So the question is, what are we practicing? Weariness or trust? Not knowing, open-heartedness, or having a fixed view that protects our fragility and vulnerability. So relaxing into whatever posture is comfortable for you right now. I'm going to first do a visualization. And I want to encourage you to just imagine yourself in the center of a circle of people who care about you, who have fondness and affection for you. And it doesn't matter how many people are in your circle, and you can put your pets in your circle. They definitely love and depend on you. You can put people that you haven't met, like maybe the Dalai Lama, or, spiritual heroes that you have, Mother Teresa, whoever it might be, Mirabai Bush. You can put them in your circle. And you can also put people who have passed away in your circle. People who have loved you but are no longer alive. And please don't try to choose people that you have no ambivalent relationship with, because your circle will be empty, except maybe for your dog or cat. But these are people who, for this moment and this period of time, are completely unable to judge you. They don't see your faults, they only see what they love about you. If they really love you, they love you in spite of and including your flaws and foibles. And if you feel a little bit bereft, like, wait a minute, I really don't have anybody in my circle, who would I put? Just put everybody in the retreat, all around you. Because here we're really practicing welcoming and liking, being friendly, appreciating each other. And then look into their eyes, one by one. If you have the entire retreat, hundreds of people around you, you might do this a little more swiftly. But just take a moment to receive their positive regard. These are all people who will be happy if something good happens to you. Your happiness and well-being makes them happy. And so one by one, just receive their fondness, affection, warmth, love for you. And notice if it feels good, if it makes you feel kind of squirmy, like you want to deflect it. You're just able to revel and bask in the warmth of it. Notice if the mind wanders away, come back. This circle of caring around you. sometimes call it the jelly roll because it's sweet. Circle of beings all rolled around you, offering the sweetness of their caring. And then when you're ready, just gently acknowledging each person, either with a hug, maybe a bow, just a glance. Appreciating their metta, loving kindness. And thanking them for being in your circle. Thanking them for their care, respect, appreciation, and love. And as you go around the circle, appreciating each one, you can let them melt into your heart and vanish. Now we're going to begin a formal loving kindness meditation. And traditionally this meditation is offered to different categories of beings. We begin with ourselves. Or if that just feels cringy and difficult for any reason for you, you can begin with somebody who's been kind to you in this life, a benefactor, a mentor, a friend. And when we decide to grow our capacity for love, usually what we encounter are all our difficulties, problems with loving. So if while we do this meditation together, you don't feel love, gushing out of your heart, but instead feel something more contracted, it's okay. Metta is beyond all the changing threads of emotion, of attachment and aversion. It's a unifying force of loving all that is. Feeling connected, close, and intimate with who we most truly are, the source of our being. So I'm going to offer some phrases that carry this energy and intention to love. And if you could repeat the phrase to yourself, and all you really have to do is just listen to what's being said, to what you're saying when you say the phrase. And you can notice, I'm going to offer a bunch of phrases. You can notice which ones resonate for you. I'll say the phrase, you'll repeat it silently and listen as you do. May I be safe and protected from inner and outer harm. May I live with the ease of an open heart. And you don't have to try to write these down because this is being recorded. You can find it later. May I be truly happy and deeply peaceful. May I be healthy and strong. And if that's not possible, may I accept my limitations with grace. May I care for myself joyfully. May my heart be steady through the ups and downs of life. May I have the inner and outer resources I need. May I love my life completely, just as it is. Or may I accept my life completely, just as it is. Not the acceptance of resignation, but the acceptance of willingness, of surrender. And may I love myself completely, just the way I am. So we're not trying to be mindful of the breath or just focusing all the attention on these phrases, planting seeds of loving kindness with each phrase, planting seeds of goodness and caring, of compassion and love. One more time. May I be safe and protected from inner and outer harm. May I live with the ease of an open heart. May I realize my true nature. May I awaken to my radiant true nature as boundless love. And may I be truly happy and deeply peaceful. May my body feel strong and alive. May I be well, free from pain. May I accept my limitations with grace. May I care for myself joyfully. May I be free from troubles and worries, free from anxiety and fear. May my heart be steady through all the ups and downs of life. May I have the resources I need. May I be grateful for my life, just as it is. And may I love myself completely, just the way I am. And now, usually we would go through different categories of beings, friend and neutral person and difficult person. And so I would just like to take a moment, instead of thinking of a difficult person out there, to just tune into what you feel are difficult, some difficult part or parts of yourself. And you don't, again, have to love these parts of yourself, but just to free our hearts from aversion, judgment, hatred, so that we can accept it all, the good, the bad, the ugly. And speak to this difficult part. Wish it well. If this part of you felt loved and accepted, chances are it wouldn't be so bothersome, get in the way, hold you back. May you two peacefully coexist in my heart. Sometimes it can be an inner child who just needs some love and attention and understanding. And then opening our hearts to all beings everywhere without exception. May all beings be safe and protected. May all beings live with the ease of an open heart. May all beings be truly happy, deeply peaceful. May all beings be free from suffering. Be free. May we and all beings be grateful for our life, just as it is. And may we and all beings love ourselves completely, just as we are. Imagine a world of mutual respect and harmony that could be ours, that can be ours. The last poem from Raymond Carver that he wrote at the end of his life. He is asking himself, so what did you want in this life after all? Did you get what you wanted in this life? Even so. And he answers himself and says yes. And then he asks himself, what did you want? And he answers, to feel myself beloved on this earth. May we and all beings know ourselves, our true nature, to be beloved on this earth. Thank you, everybody, for your practice. If there are questions, we can come up to me at the break if there are questions about this practice, because it's Jack's turn.
Thank you, dear Trudy. That was lovely. Thank you. I'm just sort of basking in the metta. Just stay with that.
That's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
You could say the benefits of
Ah.
That's one of the benefits. You sleep peacefully, you wake peacefully, you bask. People love you. Animals love you.
You love them back. Yes. So I'd like to also teach a practice or two this morning, and to build on what Trudy was offering to us. I'm aware that even as we sit in paradise, open your heart in paradise, over these recent years as I've been teaching, and actually it's here with us, is there's also a considerable cultural anxiety that we share about climate change and refugees and continuing conflict and war and homelessness. The things that weigh on our heart, the crazy, racist, poverty prison system that we have that locks up millions of people. I've done a bit of prison work in different places, and reading this from someone else who was doing that. He was in a woman's prison, and he said, I met this young mother who had a 10-year sentence for writing fake checks without sufficient funds. she told me that it was for her children. She was like a character out of a Victor Hugo novel. I couldn't quite accept what she was saying, even though she wept as she told me. And then I checked her file and discovered she had, in fact, been convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison for writing 10 fake checks, including 3 to Toys R Us. None of the checks was for more than $150. So what we're doing in our culture, we also carry in our hearts. We know this. And it weighs on us. And the question is, if we're practicing compassion and loving kindness and mindfulness, loving awareness, these trainings that are an expression or an invitation to love, how do they work? How do they help us with all of this? And the first thing is that we actually have to recognize the suffering and not turn our gaze away from it. And also realize somehow that in this world, which is both unbearably beautiful and carries the ocean of tears, all of it, that suffering is not the end of the story. It's the first noble truth of the Buddha, that there is suffering. Anybody not have that, by the way, please raise your hand. You have your money back. It doesn't say that life is suffering, but life has suffering. It's part of it. But that's the first noble truth. The second is its causes: greed, attachment, hatred, ignorance, delusion, and so forth. We can see it writ large across the world. We can find it in our own hearts. Fortunately, there's a third and fourth noble truth. There's an end to suffering, and there are practices or a path that lead us to inner freedom or liberation. And this freedom which comes, we'll talk about the practice of mindful, loving awareness, of mindfulness and meditation, but really the practice of presence that Ram Dass has been promulgating along with his kind of lighthouse radiance of love, is the freedom to be able to be present for this mysterious, beautiful, painful, wild incarnation. And the freedom that comes with our training in mindful, loving awareness and meditation, the first dimension of it is that we're able to tolerate our life. The neuroscientists call this expanding the window of tolerance. That you're able to take your seat halfway between heaven and earth and feel the anxiety and the pain and the longing and the weariness and all those things, and the joy and the beauty that you carry, and that somehow you don't turn away from it, but you can hold it all and let your heart grow big enough to do that. I think of a young woman who came, she said she felt like she was wandering the earth as a hungry ghost because she had an eating disorder, and she would eat and binge and eat and binge, and she said every time I did it, it was like I was eating more to soothe the shame from having eaten too much before, and it was a never-ending cycle. And then finally in meditation, I learned to stay a bit kind and present with the pain in my body and my heart, instead of trying to medicate it with food over and over again, and have the remorse watching myself. I could see myself start down that sad old path, and with loving awareness I realized I don't have to do this. And tenderness grew in me, compassion. I'm grateful for the presence and compassion that has rescued me from the realm of the hungry ghost. So it's a little bit extreme, but not that far. It talks about what it means to be able to be present for this life, for the 10,000 joys and sorrows. And it's both personal to us, but it's also collective. As James Baldwin says, and I read almost every time I teach, I imagine the reasons that people cling to their hate so stubbornly is because they sense that once hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with their own pain. And so we project because we can't bear the insecurity. We've lost our job, the world economy is changing, there's climate change, there's refugees, all these things, there's uncertain. It's the Mexicans, it's the Russians, it's the gay people, it's the immigrants. When I was growing up, it was the communists. We had the enemy du jour, right? It's brown people, black people, yellow people, somebody who's different, because we can't bear the reality of change and insecurity that's also part of being human. Anybody not a little bit insecure here? Just checking, right? And so instead of projecting it on others, there's something tremendously liberating about taking our seat in the middle of it all. And it's not just the suffering, but also it's the beautiful things. Some of us, you know, we can't let the love in. Some of us are really loyal to our suffering. And it's also hard to let ourselves feel joy. But that becomes equally important to be able to sit with. So the first kind of freedom is just the ability to sit with it all and to notice that the mind can do anything. As Hui Neng, the great Zen ancestor, says, one enlightened thought and one is a Buddha, one foolish thought and one is again an ordinary person. And I think you've noticed that even in the retreat, there are these moments of great love and liberation, and then, what are they going to have for lunch? I hope they have. It's not what I want. Or the ocean, you know, the complaining. And it's all in there. You go, okay. The next thing that staying present allows, the next kind of freedom, is the freedom to see the rules, the game, the universality of the process of life itself. That wherever you look, the Buddha says, walking with the monks and nuns, look at those bubbles that are floating along the Ganges River. Look closely, tell me, is there anything substantial in them? No, there isn't, he said. He said, in the same way, examine your thoughts. They appear, they tell a story, they disappear. They're like those bubbles. Examine your emotions. They come, they have a whole life, they have a story with them. They vanish. Where do they go? They go back to, you know, emptiness, where they came from. Back to the source, back to the dinosaurs and Kubla Khan and the pyramids and Y2K. What happened to yesterday, right? What happened to, you know, the beginning of this retreat? It all just goes back. And you start to see nothing lasts. That it's all in that way, appearing and disappearing. And there comes, when you realize it, what my teacher Ajahn Chah called the wisdom of uncertainty. Somerset Maugham said there are 3 rules for writing the great English novel. Unfortunately, no one knows what they are, right? The wisdom of uncertainty is the ability, again, to tolerate that things are in change and to trust this in some very deep way. And with it comes a sense of common humanity. And when I've taught and worked on retreats and somebody will raise their hand and talk about, you know, someone in their family who committed suicide, and I'll say, how many other people in this room have had someone in your family or close to you commit suicide, you know, and a whole number of hands go up, and then they look at each other and say, oh, okay, this is part of being human. You know, or somebody talks about addiction, I could ask, all right, how many in this room, you don't have to raise your hands, have someone in your family or in your immediate orbit who struggled with addiction? Raise your hands, let's just see what happens. See, look around. And it's not you, it's us. It's us, and so there comes the sense that we're in it together, that we're in the joys and we're in the sorrows, and that little by little the heart expands and says, yes, we can hold it all. And then, the next level of freedom, seeing this is what it is to be human and we're in it together, is the freedom that comes to ask the question that Ram Dass started with and in the film spoke beautifully of, to whom does this happen? So when my teacher Ajahn Chah went to the great master of the day, greatest master, and described all his meditations and lights and dissolving into, bliss and all kinds of insights. Said, how am I doing? The teacher said, you missed the point. Those are just experiences. They're like movies appearing, a war movie and a documentary and a comedy and a romance and so forth. The only real question is, to whom do they happen? And there comes the capacity to turn back our attention, to become the witness, to become what Ajahn Chah called the one who knows. And with it there comes a kind of tenderness and perspective. You know that Ojibwe saying, sometimes I go about pitying myself when all the while I'm being carried by great winds across the sky. There's a kind of spaciousness that says, this is human incarnation. And let me open to this with a tenderness and say, all right, let me step back. So this is a nice thing to talk about, but how do we actually do it? So I'd like us to do meditation. Let yourself sit comfortably again, put things down. And instead of starting, as we might, with mindfulness of breath, which is a great practice, and as you're aware of the breath, you get to see all the joys and sorrows of your mind and heart rise and pass around the breath. Or instead of doing mindfulness of the body or metta, this is a practice of listening. So allow your eyes to close gently for this practice. And with your eyes closed, bring your attention now to the doorway of the ear and begin to listen to sound. And the beautiful thing about a meditation on sound is that you can't affect it, you can't do it wrong or right. There are these words. They're the soft sounds in the room. And the distant sounds of birds or waves or traffic. Just let yourself open and listen. There are sounds of movement, distant voices, these bells, rising and passing. And as you listen, let yourself sense or feel or imagine in any way you can that your mind is not the size of your head, but that your mind is bigger. It's as big as this whole tent, and then expands further to be like the sky. And that the voices you hear in the distance, and the birds and the traffic, they're all arising and passing in the vast space of your own mind. Your mind is like the sky, and you hear children in one part, laughing, crying. And in the vastness, you hear the sounds of birds, traffic. Feel or sense or imagine that the mind is like space without boundaries. Traffic moves through this vastness. Words appear and vanish. and all that appears are like clouds, like bubbles. You are the vastness. You are the vast space of awareness, of loving awareness that's transparent and open, timeless. Thoughts appear and disappear, images and words like clouds. They vanish, leaving no trace. Emotions, pleasure and pain and sadness and joy, like weather, arise in the sky of mind for a time and then vanish. You are the sky of loving awareness itself. You are loving awareness. Relax into the vastness. Trust it. Rest in it. It is your home. Sounds come and go. Thoughts and images appear and disappear. Even the body, if you feel for it, is not solid. It's a field of changing vibrations and sensations floating in the vast space of mind. And the breath moves like a breeze in space. Relax into vastness. Rest in it. Trust it. And finally, let this vast openness, the sky of mind, timeless, transparent, allowing for all things, yet not limited by them. Let this be filled with love, with a tenderness for all the beings who forget who they are, for the mystery of life. Wisdom says, I am nothing. Love says, I am everything. In the vastness, appearance and disappearance, the vastness is a field of love. Rest in it. Return to it. It is who you really are. one of the beauties of this particular practice, and again, this is an important thing to say as we finish, for some people you might have had that sense of becoming the spacious witness of all things. How many had some sense that your mind was not the size of your head? There was some vastness in some of you. Some of you didn't. Does that mean that those people who raised their hands are, you know, the good meditators, and the rest of you are going to get like a report card that says you have to repeat the retreat or something like that? It doesn't mean that at all. It simply means that this was a practice that worked for some people on this day. We're teaching a whole variety of skillful means, and this might be the right one for you. Or maybe it was the jelly roll or the loving kindness practice, or maybe it's just chanting the names of God and Ram. So the one thing you don't want to do is use these practices to judge yourself. You're already too good at that. You don't need like reinforcement from this. But if it serves you, it's a great practice. You can sit in a cafe and it's noisy and the people are going by in the cars. You want to meditate, let me just close my eyes and listen to the music of life. John Cage would say, all right, this is the symphony of sounds. And instead of being in conflict with it, you become the loving awareness itself. So then, the question is, all right, these are dimensions of freedom to tolerate and open to experience, to hold our common humanity with compassion, to become the loving witness. One more dimension of freedom. Then what do you do with this? And so the story shows this enlightened bodhisattva being coming down the mountain with a great big bag, and some seeker walks up and said, I hear you're an enlightened being, you know, an amazing liberated being. How do I do this? How do I get to be free like you? And he just lets go of the bundle he's carrying. He said, it's that simple. Let it go. Like my teacher, Ajahn Chah, we were walking one morning early across those little dikes in the rice paddies to get with our alms bowl to get our food. And there's a big rock in the field across the way, a big boulder. He said, monks, is that boulder heavy? You know, being well educated. We said, yes, it is. He said, not if you don't pick it up. So the old man let go of the bundle, and the person asking said, wow, that's it, you just let go? He said, so now what? And the old man smiled and he picked the bundle back up again and started walking off to town with what in Zen is called bliss-bestowing hand, saying, all right, I know how to let go of things, and now the next freedom is to return to the world and carry that spirit of spaciousness and good heart wherever it's needed. In Zen they say there are only two things. You sit and you sweep the garden, and it doesn't matter how big the garden is. You quiet the mind, you open the heart, and then you get up and you sweep the garden of the world. Not because you're supposed to, but because it's you. It's your world, it's your family. Of course you sweep. You know, and this is becoming a bodhisattva. Bodhisattva, a being who's committed to alleviating suffering wherever it's found. The Dalai Lama wakes up in the morning, makes this beautiful vow, may I be a lamp for those in the darkness, may I be medicine for those who are sick, may I be a resting place for the weary, may I be a boat, a raft, and have for people to cross the flood, and may I do so as long as galaxies exist till all beings are in light together. Some little vow like that, right? In Zen you sit and you start your meditation. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them all. Great vow. Little problem though, because when you go home after your retreat, you'll notice that the beings that you live with don't want to be saved by you. So then the question is, what the hell does this mean? And what it means instead is that you set the compass of your heart to alleviate suffering in yourself and with anyone that you meet. That's it. It's not that you're going to save someone, but that you offer yourself and your life to this world because you found a kind of freedom, that loving awareness that says, yes, we can be in the presence of the difficulties and we can do this out of love. So, you're able to rest in stillness and then listen to what has to be done. And I remember in the early years when I was living in Thailand, the military was in conflict. It was a military dictatorship. The students had come out and they were rioting and rebelling and trying to take down the military dictatorship. And there was big fights in the middle of Bangkok and people were getting shot. And one morning, Boris, meditation master, had all monks and nuns come in their robes, silently walk all the way into Bangkok and just stand between the lines of fire. And they stood there all morning for hours just in the hot sun, peacefully. And after they did that, the two sides began to talk to each other in ways they hadn't before. The people were being killed. Somehow they brought that quality of their own heart into the middle of the conflict. Of course, that sounds, really kind of dramatic. But the Bodhisattva is also, it's in the littlest ways. This is a woman Janet Lutz, who's a hospital chaplain. She says, twice a year, I go around and find the people in the hospital and bless their hands. And of course, she said, I bless the hands of the surgeons and the physicians and the nurses. But I also find the people in the basement, the ones who are going up and cleaning the toilets and serving the food. I look for those the most. Last year, one of them said to me, this is the most meaningful thing that happens to me all year. These people are not always valued as they should be. And when I go around and I find people wherever they are and bless their hands, they're often startled and then really touched by it, as am I. It's that simple. To see someone touched with that kind of kindness, with that level of the capacity to bless. So, Bodhisattva, one more Bodhisattva story. During my first year of teaching, a girl named Shay was assigned to my 7th grade class. She was a desperately unhappy child and rebelled against the most basic rules such as stay in your seat or raise your hand to speak. Shay and I battled for control of the classroom. I tried every technique I knew, behavior contracts, praise, reprimands, none worked. I called Shay's home every week. No parents there. She lived with an older sister who was trying to take care of her. I went to the school counselor who said I'd done enough and offered to transfer Shay out of my room, but I said, nope, she's my student, I'm going to work with her. And the other teachers looked at me with some sympathy and compassion. June finally came on the last day of school. Shay was quick to head out the door. As I sat contemplating my failure with her, she walked back in. Oh great, I thought, one last act of terrorism. In Shay's hand was a small bowl, the kind that students make in ceramics class. She thrust it into my grasp. Here, she said, it's the only thing I could think of to give you. I turned the bowl over and saw Shay's initials etched onto the bottom. Thanks for trying to like me, she said. And before I could speak, she turned and left. After several more years of teaching, I went on to become a principal and now a superintendent. Shay's bowl has never left my desk. So we hear about Bodhisattva like some glorious thing, but it's really how do we live? How do we come down the mountain? How do we come back from paradise and carry this and, love people, feed them, serve them in some way? And in that way, it's not so much being nobody, it's more being nobody special. It's just being us. Maybe that's a better translation of it. You're You're being nobody special. The key, really, is what spirit you bring to it. If you go in the refugee camps and you're depressed and frightened and so forth, you're not terribly helpful to people. They're not kind of looking for another depressed person to come in. Thank you, we have enough of that ourselves, right? Gary Snyder was asked by a mutual colleague and friend who's taught here in these retreats, Wes Nisker, in recent years. Gary, for 50 years, you've been an environmentalist, Pulitzer Prize winner, you wrote Earth Household, you talked about bioregionalism, and now you see climate change, refugees. Oh, so sweet. Oh, it's nice to have all these kids around. You see, you see the things that the oceans rising, the bigger storms, the desertification. What advice do you have for us? And Gary looked back and said, don't feel guilty. If you act out of guilt or anger or fear, you're just adding to what made it happen. The only force that's really big enough to save it, and this is really what Gary meant, if you're going to save it, don't save it out of anger and fear, guilt. Save it because you love it. That's it. It's us. It's our people, it's our animals, it's our trees, it's our earth. And that force which has mothers lift cars off children, that's the one that's needed. I think particularly we need the mothers right now because the men have made rather a mess of it, honestly. And so what spirit do you do it in? And I think about different demonstrations I've been at it in the recent years, the March for Our Lives in Washington, I was there, Emma Gonzalez and so forth. There were 800,000 people out. And the thing that was most beautiful is how civil it was. There was popcorn stands and children running around and balloons and, I was at a demonstration with my daughter who's an asylum lawyer and works as a human rights lawyer to try to get asylum for people whose lives are in danger. And we went down to the airport after those draconian presidential edicts about people not coming in the country from the Muslim world, basically. There were all these hot young lawyers who went down, we're going to do something, and there was 2,000 people down there protesting with their signs and all of that. And the gate we went to, it turned out there were many more lawyers than there were people who needed help. They put up a little sign like, peanuts or something, free immigration law for anyone who needs it. It was great. But anyway, we're there. People are carrying these signs and chanting, no ban, no fear. Refugees are welcome here. In the middle of the 400 people at this gate was a New Orleans jazz band. So we're chanting and the drummer kicks in and gives us a little rhythm, and then the trumpet plays a little riff on top of it, the sax kicks in, and pretty soon we're doing no ban, no fear, refugees, welcome here. We're all singing together. The cops are smiling, the security people are all like dancing with us. We were demonstrating, but we were doing it artfully. We weren't like out there, that old fighting against, we weren't going away. We were there, but we were doing it with joy. We were doing it in an entirely different way. Molly Ivins, the great activist and writer, she says, so keep on fighting for freedom and justice, beloveds, but don't forget to have fun doing it. And that's part of what it means. The Bodhisattva is the carrier of joy in some way, so that when you leave here, and it doesn't mean you're not going to have your down days and that you're not facing refugees and climate and all of those things. The difficulties that humanity faces, almost all of them, come from the human heart. The climate problems, the prison systems, the economic injustice, all these kind of things. They come from greed and hatred and ignorance. The solution is in the human heart, and you become one of the people that plant the seeds that make a change for this. So you go back into the world, you pick your bundle back up, but with that spaciousness that you are loving awareness, and you get to play, even in the difficulties, and you're unafraid to turn toward them. And then you say, all right, let me pick the one that I can make a difference in, that I can contribute to. One of my favorite poets and friends, Diane Ackerman, wrote a prayer that's like a modern bodhisattva vow. She writes, in the name of daybreak, and the eyelids of morning, and the wayfaring moon, and the night when it departs, I swear I will not dishonor my soul with hatred, but offer myself humbly as a guardian of nature, a healer of misery, a messenger of wonder, and an architect of peace. That's a beautiful intention, and it's from a very fine poet. So I want you to do something now. I'd like you to close your eyes. And as you envision yourself in another day and a half or so, getting ready to leave Open Your Heart in Paradise retreat and return back to the other parts of your life. If on this beautiful morning in Hawaii, with all the teachings and community around you and reminders, if you could make your own bodhisattva vow, what would it be? And it can be very simple. It doesn't have to be a whole poem. It might be, I vow to be kind. It could be that simple. But let yourself reflect, setting the compass of your heart. What direction would it be? Now the next thing, as you've done this, is I'd like you to open your eyes and very quietly, without conversation about it, this is more like a very tender connection. I want you to turn to somebody next to you and listen to their vows if they're willing to tell you what they are. Just listen silently and then tell them yours, and then stay with that person for a moment. So go ahead, do that. Not a conversation, just listening to the vow and speaking yours. And as you finish this, now notice what it felt like to speak it and hear it. It brings it more alive. We don't have this Sohbet, the Sufis call it, this conversation of the heart so much. Now look into the eyes of another person. We're not going to do the whole big Sufi stare thing again, so it's okay. You're all right. But look into the face of that person, of that other being. and see in them the child of the Spirit, the joy that was born in them, and see the Bodhisattva, that they have seeds in them that they could plant in this world of love and joy. And let yourself see that in the other, and let those seeds in you be seen as well. And just take a minute or two to look and see. They have these beautiful seeds to change this world. May they be joyful. May their joy and happiness spread. May they move through the world with loving awareness. And then in whatever way works for you, give them a blessing, that they not forget, that they remember what they can do. And this world is waiting for them to plant beautiful seeds, to make a difference, to bring their love out in some way, and their joy. When you're ready, let yourself turn back. And this is the final meditation instructions for you this morning from Laurie Chapman. You can talk in the break in just a minute about that, and you can continue your conversation of the heart with one another if you wish. She writes, I like nothing more in my life than sitting there on my ass doing nothing, just listening. She said, and it's not my fault that I like this, because I happen to have an amazingly comfortable ass. In fact, if you understood, you would see, if you had an ass like this, you would see that getting up off this ass would be a crime against nature. So this is your meditation instruction. It's not a grim duty. It's not trying to fix yourself. It's actually to sit there, become the sky of loving awareness, to do the metta that Trudy taught you, to remember your bodhisattva vow that you just made so beautifully and shared with one another, and realize that the world is waiting for you. It's waiting for you to share your love and your seeds and your goodness. And Lord knows, or whoever that is, Buddha knows, Ram knows, they all know, we need you. We actually need you, and it's beautiful. So thank you.